one of the goals with this barn is we'll put a wall like right here, and this whole front will be a shop with beekeeping supplies. There's not a lot of good places to get beekeeping supplies here in Utah. So we'll be able to hopefully help these guys who make amazing equipment. I don't think Stan made any of this.
Nope.
But this is just another beekeeper. But Stan makes beautiful, beautiful woodsware that lasts a long time. So hopefully we'll be able to have him stock that. It's made local. And a lot of this is for education. That's something we focus a lot on the farm here is educating people and empowering them to learn and know that they can do it and homestead on any size of property, whether it's 5 acres or a fifth of an acre. So Stan's going to teach a little bit in here, and then we'll go out and have some hands-on out in the sunshine with the beehives.
Welcome to the bee class. Today we're going to talk about equipment first, I guess, for a few minutes. There's lots of different styles and types and manufacturers of beekeeping supplies and equipment out there, and we get lots of questions about what's the best type to use, so we thought we'd have a look at some beekeeping equipment before we go outside and then look at the bees.
Do you want to tell who you are?
So my name is Stan Moulton. This is my wife Alicia. We're the honey company. We used to be in Provo. We moved down to Sanpete County. We're in Springville, Spring City now. And so we've been keeping bees for quite some time. It goes back several generations on my side of the family. So we're still in ag business and still trying to keep bees the best we can. So we have a lot of bee health issues as the industry, we as in the industry does right now. But as I read back at some of the older beekeeping books, it's nothing new. Yeah, varroa mites might be new, but the troubles with the bee industry and agriculture in general aren't. We're subject to the weather. We're subject to lots of things that are out of our control. We just do the best we can and keep going. Somehow we're here another year. So we'll talk today a little bit, beginning with equipment. So we have a beekeeper friend of ours recently died down in Sanpete County, and his wife called me up and says, "So I don't know what to do with all this beekeeping stuff. We're going to sell it, but we don't know what to do. Just come and get it." So I have some used beekeeping stuff here that's not made by a beekeeper supply industrial manufacturer, but it's some fun stuff. We'll show you those things. If you want to buy some of those, we're just going to give the money to Cheryl. So we'll start with that, I guess. Okay.
And did you say it's like $5?
Yeah, I'll tell you some prices. So we've got most of the items here, a box or a feeder or something, $5 so we'll show you some of those too. So let's see. Bottom boards. Okay. Let me start here. So this isn't necessarily a bottom board. It could be used when it's a cloak. We'll talk about Mr. Cloak. He was from Australia or New Zealand. He invented a way of raising queen bees, manipulating a hive so it's queen right or queen. I'll show you how this works in a minute. It's a little complicated. It's kind of advanced beekeeping, but I'll show you what this is used for if anybody's inclined to try that. This is just basically a landing board, so you put your hive on top of this, right? So we have a bottom board for your beehive right there, and then on top of that you have your 10-frame box or whatever size on top of it. So the bees land right here, and then they can call. So that's a landing board there. This is a bottom board. The reason that the person who built this put this on the back and not front, so it's not level, it's tipped. There's a couple of advantages, maybe some disadvantages. So if your hive, as you stack up your boxes on top of this, was leaning forward a little bit, maybe rain or snow melt on the front there wouldn't run into the hive, it'd run out. It makes it easier for the bees to clean the house too. There's always some debris on the bottom board there's some dead bees there, and it makes it easier for them to kick those out from the porch when they're cleaning the house. So that's the reason you do that.
What's the disadvantage?
Well, the disadvantage is it's not level, so it's tilted a little bit. Let's say you're putting on a feeder on top and you're filling that clear full of syrup. It could spill over. The bees like to build their comb nice and level, right? So forward or backwards, if they're building their comb as your frames are in here, wouldn't be a big problem. But if the hive's not level, let's say you use a foundation site, sometimes they'll build the comb. They want to build the comb in line with gravity, right? So if your hive's not perfectly level, then they could build cross frame or connect it to a frame next to it or something like that. So generally, forward to backwards is not a problem, but it's nice to have the hive level for a couple of reasons. There's another bottom. I think this is more of a standard commercially built bottom. So you can use it. You can use it with this side up or this side up. So we've got 3/8 of an inch clearance here for the bees to come in the entrance underneath the box. So that would be more for winter. It'd be easier to put a introducer or a mouse guard on there. All right, you can put it this way where it's 3/4 of an inch up, right? And then you could put one of those outside feeders on it, and it'll still fit in the entrance. You have a little more space for ventilation if you want more ventilation. We'll talk about that also today. But that's more of a standard commercial built bee supply manufacturing.
Will you show yours now?
Yes. Yes, let's see.
It's on the table behind.
Okay, so we have this is the one that I'm manufacturing. So we made this a little different on the sides, so you can pick it up with a hand truck, right? A dolly or something, or it fits on a pallet. Commercial beekeepers will usually put their bees on a pallet, 4-way pallet, right? And so this will hold it on, keep it from sliding off the pallet. You have a piece of wood underneath it. So that's the type of bottom board that we use and that we make. These are for sale also. They've got a bottom board and they've got a newer lid with metal on it. Those are for sale. These are a new price. These are a little different. If you need a lid or a bottom board, those are available. All right, so that's a little bit on the bottom boards. Next, let's look at a quilt. So they'll call this a quilt, and it'll fit on top of the hive for winter. So a beekeeper friend made these, and they come in different kind of designs and styles. It's got lots of ventilation. There's a screen inside there, so that bugs, mice, whatever can't get in here. So this just has some wood shavings in it, and that's to absorb the moisture that the bees give off when they consume honey. So in the wintertime, you put this on in the wintertime, and this goes above. It's got a screen on the bottom, right? So it would go above the hive in the wintertime, and then on top of this, let's see, where's my cup here? So on top of the beehive, you would have, you put your inner cover, right? And this is the beehive. Your quilt board, your quilt box would go on top of that. So the moisture given off by the bees would ventilate up through the feed hole in the inner cover above the cluster, and then it would be absorbed by the material inside, right? And then you would have on top of that, you would have your lid. You'd probably have a telescopic, which would be what should be like this. So telescopic lid fits over. Comes down over the edges of the box on all sides. Right? So you have your telescopic lid like that. The idea, I'm not necessarily saying these are things that you need to be a successful beekeeper. Right? So I don't use quilt boards. The main reason I don't is because we have hundreds of colonies. It's just another piece of equipment. that we would have to manage and be able to find out. But it might be a handy thing to absorb moisture in the wintertime. We don't want to get the bees too wet. So if you had just your regular lid on top of your beehive, when they consume honey, they give off moisture, and it collects, that condensation, it collects on the underside of the lid in the wintertime, and then it can drip on the bees and get them wet. So if they're cold and wet, now we're in trouble. If they're just cold, but they're dry, they'll probably be okay, as long as they've got honey. But this is the idea behind a quilt board, and it's been around for a long time. Is it absorbs moisture in the winter. Right, and then it ventilates out there, so it pulls the moisture away from the bees anyway. And they can
Will you show the migratory style lid while you're on lids?
All right, so that's a telescopic type lid, and the migratory type lid sits flush like this one. It sits flush with the side. Right, so when you're stacking bees up on your truck, you're moving bees a lot, or they're on a pallet, they could sit next to each other side by side. They're flush. So when you tie them down, right, there's not a space in between. You can tie them down secure on a pallet on the truck. So that's a migratory tops flush with the side because you're shipping them to California back or wherever you're moving to. Telescopic lids, they're probably better for the bees if you're going to leave them in one spot, right? You're going to put them in the backyard and you're not going to move them. Only maybe occasionally if you have to. Right?
But both work.
They both work fine. There's nothing wrong with either one. So, I say there's nothing wrong. There's advantages and disadvantages to both. So, if you have on your beehive, so just recently, last week, I know another beekeeper says, I'm using these telescopic tops, but I gotta have some inner cover with mine because one of them I couldn't get it off. So the idea with the migratory top is you take your hive tool, right, what it's used for, and you stick that in there and you pry it off after the bees have stuck everything down with wax and propolis. Right? These are easy to get off, so you don't have to have an inner cover. Right? So if the bees stick it down, you can't get your hive tool under there. Sometimes it'll take quite a bit of effort to get that lid unglued when the bees stick it down. Right? So that's one disadvantage to a telescopic cover is that you need to have an inner cover to go with it, right? So you put the inner cover on, and the bees can stick this down, right? And then when you need to get that off, then you can use your hive tool to pry it off. Right? So you'll have your inner cover, and then you'll have your telescopic cover. We don't use those because that's another piece of equipment we've got to have and maintain, and which is a problem if you move bees involved. So, all right. This is also a good deal, these telescopic covers. It's a good deal for the bees because it provides an air gap, right? A buffer in between there. So on a hot day like this, right, if you've got something in between where the heat directly is and the cluster of the bees will help it stay cool, right? So that's a nice thing. It'll also trap air in there in the wintertime and help it stay warm. So it helps the bees regulate their temperature a little better if you've got an inner cover and a telescopic cover, right? These don't have that. They have to be in direct contact with the cluster of bees underneath. Right? So when it gets real hot like this, if you've got your bees in full sun in the afternoon, it might be nice to put something on top of your migratory top, right? If you had another board to place over the top of this, right? So the direct sunlight wouldn't be right on this piece of wood. You'd have just a little air going through there, and it might be helpful if it's really hot, depending on your location. We had a lot of dead bees last year, and we got, as a result, we have a lot of honey that's still left in the comb from the bees that died over this last winter. And when it got real hot here a couple of weeks ago, I came into one of my bee yards and there's a trail and a puddle of honey right out front of one of the hives. It got so hot in there that it melted the wax enough for the honey to run out. There were no bees in it. Now, if there's bees in it, they would circulate air, right, and keep it cool. They can manage the temperature. It was empty, other than honey, and it got hot enough to melt the honey right there. So that's probably wouldn't have happened if I had an inner cover telescope.
How do you help bees when it's really hot? What do you do?
Right, so when they gotta have plenty of water. They need water. The closer to the water, the better. I wouldn't necessarily put water right next to the hive. So bees like to have some distance between their hive and their foraging source, their nectar source, or their propolis or pollen, right? Because bees will drag out any disease, anything dead in the hive, they drop it out and they'll carry it out and drop it, that's fine. So if you were to put water some ways away, then they wouldn't drop a dead bee in it, right? And maybe cycle diseases back into the hive. That's their way of keeping the hive clean, is they don't pour it. So if you're putting bees right in the middle of your garden, I might put them over to the side or slightly outside the garden. So they're not foraging where their dead, decomposing bees are, right? So water would be one, put water near the hive for them. They need plenty of water. That'll help keep cool. So they go to the water and they bring water in and they'll put little water drops inside some of the cells, and they'll put water drops on the top of the frames on the wood, and they'll evaporate. So they're used just like a swamp water, right? And then they circulate air. You'll see bees on the landing. You'll probably see some here in a minute when we'll look at them. They're going to be hot, so they'll be fanning. They'll be out there fanning. They're circulating air through the phone. Right?
Any tips on a good bee water source?
Yeah, so if you have the easiest way to maintain a water source would be a sprinkler. Let's say you've got a sprinkler in your yard that's leaking. It's dripping just a little bit, not significantly enough to contribute much to the water shortage we're having. But well, maybe one want to think twice. If the bees are going to that source for water where it's just a little drip, I would just leave it and pick up. So there's otherwise they're going to end up in your livestock feeder. They're going to end up in your chicken feeder. They're going to end up in your neighbor's bird bath. They're going to end up in your neighbor's swimming pool. So most of the time when we have to move bees because of conflict between people and bees, it's because of a water source. They're in the neighbor's swimming pool. The neighbors are going to have a party and they don't want the bees, somebody getting stung, so they're going to ask us to move bees. So it's to keep good relations with your community would be to have a water source for your bees. There's different ways to water bees. You can get a chicken waterer, right? And fill it up with pebbles, rock or marbles or something, so the bees don't drown. That's a good source for them. They can, if you see bees out in the wild, like with our feral bee project, that's one way we can locate where bees are, is we know they're close to their water source, and they'll be by a stream, but they'll be on the rocks, just the wet rocks. They're not going to be right on the water's edge because they could get in there and drown. So they'll be on the wet mud, rocks that are wet near the water, the main stream of water. So if you can kind of mimic that with your water and bees, that'd be great. Put out chicken water and fill it up with rocks so they can hang on the rocks there. So that's if you have a ditch or canal or something nearby, maybe you don't even have to worry about it. You got an open water source nearby. You probably won't have to worry about that. Okay. All right, a couple more things on equipment. That's most of it, but we have some feeders. Let me show you some feeders. These are some lids here. These are lids we've got. If anybody's interested in those, that's a lid, a telescopic lid for a new pod. So feeders, okay. Here's one source. Here's one way of feeding these. So this is just like an inner cover with a feed hole, right?
A bit more.
Yeah, and so you can see the person who built these made some little blocks. When you're not feeding bees, you can just cover those up. And then when you are, you can take your mason jar, whatever kind of a jar, poke a few little tiny holes in the lid, right, and fill it with syrup and then turn it upside down. So that goes on top. That goes on top of your box there. You've got a jar of feed upside down. So that's a good way to feed bees. It minimizes robbing. And it's a good way to feed bees when the weather's cold because the cluster will be in the middle of the box right up near the top. So the heat coming off the cluster will warm up the feed and it's close by the bees. They don't have to travel anywhere inside the hive to pick the feed up. So this is a really good way to feed bees.
What do you mean by it prevents robbing, like from other
Right,
bees?
so,
Or?
yeah, so robbing certain times of year when there's not any nectar out for the bees, and they're out, but it's warm enough weather for the bees to fly, they're gonna be out buzzing around looking for something to do. And if they find a weak colony, the robber bees will go in there and they'll steal the honey and take it back there. So, not just other honeybees, but also wasps. Right? So this way of feeding is a good way to help reduce the risk of robbing.
Because it's inside the hive.
Yeah.
So do you usually set a box around the top of that one too, just an empty box
Yeah.
to protect the jars, or?
Usually I will. So if we've got, like Sam using a glass jar, and the bees will pick that up faster if it's warm. And so if the sun's going to hit it and warm that feed up, they'll pick it up even quicker. So sometimes I'll just put it right on top of there. I know the robbing's not a real risk. When I know I want that feed to be warmer, they'll pick it up faster. Then I won't. But if I know robbing's trouble, or I know it's going to rain, we're going to get rain down in here, fall up here, or it's going to snow on it, then I'll put a shell on it. Put an empty box, just with the shell, and then lay on top of it.
Stan, what
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
syrup?
What kind of syrup? Okay. So if you got to feed the bees, you want to use sucrose,
Well, honey first, right?
right? If you have it. So this year we didn't have to feed the bees anything because I had so how much honey left over from last year from my dead colonies, right? And they died for reasons other than American foul brood. So I wasn't worried about feeding that honey back to the bees. I just put a thing of honey. So if you have some honey, not real old, you're going to have somebody that has an old can of honey back in the 70s and earlier. They used to put it in those metal 5-gallon cans. That stuff's probably not the best for you.
Because the
I've fed some
cans
bees that
rust.
before. Yeah,
Make
and
it
it rusts. It'll rust in there and it will react. The acidity in the honey will react with the metal and it'll turn black. And I killed some bees last year by feeding some of that. So I wouldn't necessarily do that. So,
Store in glass or plastic,
Yeah.
not metal.
right, glass is best, I guess, and then plastic next. So if you have, let's see, if you've had the choice what we're going to feed bees, fructose, high fructose corn syrup, or sucrose, table sugar. You can buy a bag of that at the store, 25-pound bag. We'll mix up maybe 3 gallons of syrup. That's what the bees prefer. If you gave the bees a buffet, right? You put out all those sugars that you think they might like, they'll go to sucrose. They like that one. Right? So I mean, you've got everything from molasses, don't feed your bees that, to brown sugar to agave nectar, whatever. Put out all the different sugars that there is, all the different sweeteners, and they'll go to sucrose. So buy a bag of sucrose, mix that up as thick as you can. Right? If we're going to feed bees, we want to feed bees sugar, not water. Right? So forget about all those ratios you hear about 2 to 1 and 1 to 1, and what time of year did you do this? Just you're feeding sugar, mix it up as thick as you can, so it's still dissolved in warm water, not boiling water. Don't boil it. Just mix it up as thick as you can in warm water. The only reason you're using warm water is because it dissolves faster, so you don't have to sit there and mix it, right? Thick sucrose, that's what you do. Okay, let's see, I was talking about feeders, so that's one way of feeder. It's easy to make. You don't have to have anything fancy, really screens, or you could just have a piece of a piece of plywood, and cut a hole in it and put a feed bottle.
What size hole do you do?
It doesn't matter really. So you could cut it just slightly larger than the lid on your mason jar or whatever lid you're using, but you don't have to. It's just big enough for, it could be a 1/2 inch or it could be, 1.5 inches like this, 2 inches, whatever. Just enough so several bees can get in there, put their tongue in that tiny little pinhole you poked in the lid of your upside down jar. So that's an easy and good way to do it, right? You don't have to build a specialized thing. So the old, they used to call these an escape board. There was a piece of beekeeping equipment you could put in here, and the bees could go down back into the hive, but it had a little spring in there. They couldn't come back up. So sometimes you hear this referred to as an escape board. More people don't use those so much anymore. They're still available, but quite often you'll hear it as the inner cover, and that's a feed hole rather than the bee escape, right? Because you can take your bottle and put it upside down like this, right, and make it feed air, right? So your hole doesn't have to be rounded, no matter what size it is. Okay, another type of feeder. Let's look at one of these. Here we go. So this one's, man, this thing would probably hold 3 or 4 gallons. So you'll put this on top of your hive like this on a 10-frame hive, right? And the bees can crawl up through here, right? And then they can't get directly into the feed and drown because they've got this screen. So they crawl up there, and then they can crawl down and pick up the feed that you put in here, the syrup.
So there's a space between the screen and the edge of the black part?
Right,
Oh,
space
okay.
between it. Pass it around, look at it.
Okay, I'm gonna
So
show
those
the
are good
camera
feeders.
first.
They could
For online
contribute to a
Okay.
robbing problem if you wanted to use those, because if your wood's not sitting exactly square, or you've got a box that's not exactly tight, bees can get in there and it can start robbing. Plus, it's a lot of open surface area of feed, and other bees, wasps, earwigs, ants can smell it, right? So you'll get robber bees who will come in sometimes with those top high feeders.
So you're robbing in the fall?
Fall, mostly is when robbing is in the fall. It'll happen anytime there's a nectar shortage, which could happen now, who knows, if it's dry. Okay, so there's another type of,
So could you use a shallow feeder like this if you have like deep boxes or medium boxes?
yeah, you can use a shallow feeder. Say that again.
Well, does it matter the box depth? Like, could you use that on any hive?
Oh, yeah, you could. The bees would have to crawl up the side of the box and then into the feeder. If it was a deeper box, which you could, you wouldn't necessarily have to cut down a box to put that type of feeder.
But you could buy that and put it on any hive?
Yeah, you could.
Any 10-frame hive?
Yes, you could. Let's see, another type. Let me get you another type of feeder. So this one here is basically the same as that top pipe feeder we just looked at. Only this one's kind of a homemade thing. So we just got in here a Rubbermaid container, right? So the bees, so this would be on top of the hive. The bees could crawl up through this hole here, right? And then they crawl up around through this, and the screen keeps them from getting into where the feed is and drowning, right? So they pick it up there, and then they crawl back out and down. So this is a good way to do it. This one I like. These top hive feeders are nice because when on top of your hive, you can just take the lid off, and you can feed them without having to get into the bees. We're not disturbing the bees. They're not flying out. We're not actually into the bee hive. We're just into the feeder. So it makes it easy to refill the feeder, put the lid back on without disturbing the bees. So top hive feeders are nice. They're pretty handy. If some bees did get in there while you're working on it, there's some little dials here where you can close it or you can open it. You want to keep that closed when there's feed in there so other robber bees don't come and get it, right?
Will you spin it without holding the hive tool? Because we can't see. There you go.
Right. So these aren't really, some of these are handy and necessary, especially if you're moving bees, but you know, it's a way to let bees out. If you get in here, you're going to get some bees and some wasps in there while you're opening up and feeding it. And then you don't want to trap a few bees in there, so you could open this up and let them out, come back later and close it so they can't get back in and rob. You know, there's a number of different uses for these little screens you can put on the hive. So we've got a few of these if you're interested in one of these. So let me say this though. First of all, so we typically, as a policy, don't sell used equipment because there is a risk that if you're buying used equipment, that if there was disease in that equipment, it could spread to your bees, right? So the items that we brought today are things that would have a very low likelihood of having any problem. The disease that you want to be aware of in old beekeeping equipment is in the frames, is in the comb. So, so there's been brood raised through the wax, right? Wax is kind of a sink where you're going to have bacteria and viruses in there, and whatever the bees bring in is going to end up stuck in the wax. Could be pesticides, insecticides that they gathered from some places. So we're not selling any frames. We're not selling any comb, any used comb, right? So a top high feeder, you know, like these quilts, they're not in direct contact with the bee cluster. You know, there's not going to be any problem with it. So we did have some bottom boards, but all the debris from the hive, you know, falls on the bottom board. So sometimes those can be dirty. They'll have some. So we're not selling them. We have some lids, some inner covers. They're okay. I wouldn't be afraid of taking them home for a reason of American foul proof. Yeah.
Does flaming the hives a little bit help kill that, or is that just a myth?
Yeah, it will if you do it right. So here's some things to remember about foul brood. Let me mention the diseases that you need to be aware of. So American foul brood is a bacteria, and it gets into the bee's guts in the larva stage, right? And it begins to grow right as the bees will cap over the larva, the cell, the brood cell, and that developing bee goes from larva to the pupa stage. That's when it grows. And that's when it spreads. It comes out of its spore form, right? It germinates, so to speak, and then it can spread, right? That's the only one we really need to worry about seriously is American foul brood. And so, if those spores are present in a hive, if they're encapsulated, they're covered, they're buried, they're smothered with melted wax from a torch, then they can't germinate if they're buried in paint, right? Or if they're encapsulated in wax or in propolis. If you know what propolis is, if you're not, we'll see a bunch of that, but it's sticky plant resins that the bees cover everything with, right? To help keep the hive antiseptic, right? It'll kill bacteria, and so. So that's one reason why you might torch it. So it's not necessarily just the heat from the torch that would burn off any disease, but it's also it'll melt that wax and the propolis that the bees have stuck all over the inside of the hive, and then if it melts wax on top of it, then it can't germinate. So it's a good, if you do it right, and you don't have to blacken, you know, you don't have to turn it to charcoal. Just run that torch over until you can see the resins in the wax bubble a little bit, and that helps. The only surefire cure for American foul brood disease, though, is fire.
It's finished burning it.
Burn it. You're all done. So it depends on. You just need some experience, I guess, on equipment. If you have some sense to know when it ought to be burnt, when you can still reuse it. Quite often, people throw away stuff that's perfectly good. The bees could fix up again. You know, you'll have a colony that will die in the wintertime. And there'll be a cluster of bees in the cells there, and they're wet and soggy, and there's mold growing all over, and they stink. Well, if it's not American foul brood, the bees will probably clean it up just fine. I just cut that out of there, straighten it down. Usually I put it back in. So it's best for me when anybody asks, well, can I reuse this or not? If there's a question, well, throw it away. Tell them, you know, we just advise you to throw it away and throw it away. So if it's not a huge expense, which usually for a hobbyist beekeeper, you know, you're talking about a few frames, or $1 a frame, or $1 for the foundation. If there's a question about it, just toss it out. It's easy. All right. Let's see.
Any other feeders that you brought?
Feeders. Okay, so we've got. I think we covered the feeders.
What about division board feeders? You want to talk about that?
Yes, let's see, where
I don't think
division
you-
board feeders, they're here somewhere, hang on a second. I think they're down here.
they-
The type of feeder that we use. Some people call it a frame feeder. It takes the place of the feeder.
Or on Mad Lake's website, it's a pro feeder. That's what they call it.
Right, so these fit inside the hive. So it holds about a gallon of syrup, right? It's classic. You just take the frame out and put that in place. And that's the kind of use.
So we can see.
Right, so that's how that fits. It's got little ears on it, just like frames do. Fits in the frame rests, right? This one has some ladders. The bees, you fill this up with syrup, and there's a little screen, and the bees can crawl down there without drowning and crawl back out after they pick up syrup. So we got a couple of these for sale if anybody wants these. And I use mine. You'll see some of mine. I think we have some in the hives here. We're going to look at in just a minute. They don't have the cap over it and the ladder. They just have a float in there. I put a stick in there that fills up most of the space, just like a little raft in there for the bees to rest on while they're picking up syrup around the sides of it so they don't drown. These are notorious for drowning bees. That's the drawback of it. So all the feeders there are on the market, there's some good points to them and some bad points to them. So you just have to choose what you like the best, I guess, and work around the bad parts. Here's a nuke. We got a couple of nuke boxes for sale if anybody wants those. And then here's a bottom board that was designed to manage two 4-frame nuke boxes. So you can see there's an entrance here and another entrance there. So you put one box here. You'll have one queen in here. They're using this entrance, and another box next to it. They're using that entrance. So you can have the same footprint as your standard 10-frame box, only you've got two separate nucleus columns.
And they won't like fight each other being that close?
No, so usually they'll stay in there, go in their direction here. Those are going the other way. They keep it separate. Yeah. So when you have bees on a pallet, or even if they're not on a pallet, you can stack them up right next to each other, And they're using entrances that are, a foot apart, and they adjust. They don't fight too much. Sometimes you see them wrestling on the porch, if somebody came in the wrong entrance, and sometimes they just let them in. If they're close to each other too, they drift a lot. If you were actually to go to the trouble to analyze which bees are going in which hive, you'll see that there's quite a bit of drift. Sometimes workers will come in and they'll go in a different hive. It's not theirs if you have them close together, but it usually isn't a big deal. Usually doesn't cause too much trouble. It's a way that disease can spread, so we should make some attempt, to keep them a little ways apart. That way mites, varroa mite doesn't spread so easily because of drift. That's one thing you can do to help. Okay. Let's see, I better show, while we're talking about equipment. So this is a bee box that we developed. It fits on top of a standard 10-frame.
And it's so pretty, right? So cute.
Some looks in mine, you've seen, if you ever look through bee catalogs, you've seen the garden tops. They've got a little slanted roof to them, a little pitch other than just that flat top roof that doesn't look too attractive. So commercial beekeepers aren't going to be worrying about that kind of stuff, but if it's in your backyard and it's a focal piece out in your garden or something, you want to have something that looks good. So it has a fancy pitched roof, all right, inside, so you can take this off. So essentially, think of this as similar use with a telescoping top. It has an inner cover with it.
There's wasps building a nest on the bottom of that. This is a warning.
And this one?
Upside down.
Look on the bottom. Crouch. There you go.
You got wasps.
Yeah,
Anybody
please.
terribly worried about the wasps?
I just want you to know, so.
Okay, so.
He doesn't care, but I care.
So, you can, let's set this up.
Okay.
Let's say we have our bottom board. You can put this directly, it's the standard 10-frame size, right? So you put this directly on your bottom board and use it as a 5-frame root box. So to begin with, it has 2 hinged side doors. On one side, we have a feeder. It's built in. So the bees can enter in through a hole drilled in the side here, and it has a way to close that or open it. Right? So if you open this up and you put syrup in here, it holds about a gallon. And then there's a raft in there, a little float piece of wood, so the bees won't drown. Right? And then on the other side, we have an observation window. Right? It's a piece of glass in there, so you can watch, you can look in there and see what the bees are doing without getting into the hive. Right? It'll hold 5 standard deep frames, right? So, excuse the lock nest, it's been outside. So it has, holds 5, same as the new box. So we made the dimensions here, same as the standard 5-frame new box. So you can put, underneath it, you can put a regular 10-frame box, right? Or you can put on top of it a standard 5-frame box, right?
Look how cute. It's still so cute. Put your lid on so they can see how cute it is.
So you can go up, you can go below with 10, your standard 10 frame, or you can go above with 5 frame.
I'm gonna build my next barn, just like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the honey company's own original invention. So once you get deep enough into bee culture, then you start making your own equipment. It's fun. It's fun for people. You know, everything out there that you need to be successful beekeepers on the market and available. But it's a fun woodworking project. It's fun to think about different types of equipment. So we put together the barn hive and had a lot of fun doing it.
Is that one for sale?
Yes, this one's kind of displayed outside in the weather, but it is for sale. If somebody wants to buy that one, we'll make a better deal on this one since it's got to have some paint. It's got to have a little.
You always sell them unpainted.
Yeah. All right. Okay, let's see, what else on equipment? So that's just some of the things we have today. So some of this used equipment is available if you want to purchase it. If not, no big deal, we'll find a home for it. And we do have some pieces of new equipment here, and we'll be selling more. Any other questions?
And just
about
a reminder that our beekeeper friend passed away,
Yeah.
and so we're gonna give the money for any sales of the used equipment to his widow to kind of help her out with,
Yeah.
So it's cheap, but we'll share that back with her.
Right. Yes.
When do you put your second box on top?
When do you?
Yeah, like how do
Okay.
you know or?
Right. So we just recently published a little video, I think Susie did. How do you know when you're late with the super? We took the lid off, and there's honey. The bees were starting to build comb on the underside of the lid, and they're putting honey on the top. You'll see that in just a minute. So the answer is when they filled up another box, yeah, it's probably a little too late, right? You want to get there in time before they used up all their space in the box below, because if you wait till too long, then the bees can swarm. They get feeling crowded,
Yeah.
and then when they got a crowded hive, then they're going to say, okay, we're out of space, it's still early enough in the season, we're going to swarm and go find a new place to live.
But if you put it, like during the winter time, if you
Yeah.
have two boxes, won't that
Yeah.
affect it? Like-
Right, so now if it's winter time, right, and the bees are shrinking in size,
Yeah.
they need less space because they're consuming honey and bees are dying during the winter. Then you want to reduce it down to a minimum space that they're going to need for the winter, just enough space so that you can keep in there enough honey to get them through the winter. So in the springtime, you want to expand it, right? In the fall, before winter, you want to reduce it. Yeah.
I think that's what I messed up the first time I did it. I pulled 4 boxes during the winter time.
Yeah.
I think the brothers.
They've got to keep that space warm in there. So yeah, that may be the reason, it may not, but it's likely, yeah, if they have a lot of space they have to keep warm, it's hard for them to maintain that temperature they need in the cluster to get through the winter. So that could be that. It's hard to freeze bees. You know, if they're in contact with honey, you know, they might have been okay in there. And if they're in the top box, because that's where all the heat rises up to, they might have been okay. You know, you could have a couple of empty boxes below, and it may not make a big difference. But the best thing to do is to reduce it down to fit the size of the cluster and the honey that they're going to need for the winter.
So do you recommend using a Queen extender or
Right. I did bring the Queen excluder. We have a Queen excluder here. These are a handy tool. I don't use them frequently unless I need to isolate the queen, right? So if I'm going to isolate the queen, then I'll sometimes use the Queen excluder. So the idea behind the Queen excluders is the distance between these wires in here is just big enough for a worker bee to go through, but the queen bee's a little bit bigger in size, so she can't fit through. So it'll keep her confined to wherever she is on either side of that queen excluder, usually below. So her brood chamber is below the queen excluder, and then honey up above. So these are notorious though for congesting the bee hive. Even though the worker bees can fit through these, they don't like to go through them. They have to learn to go through them. You put it on there for a while and they fight it and they don't want to go through there. Eventually they find how to wiggle through it and get into the upper supers. But it'll cost you honey if you use these.
Oh,
Yeah, they don't like them, so they just don't work the frames on the comb as quickly with these things. So they're a handy tool to have, but I don't use them generally as for production for honey. I don't leave them on.
so the queen won't go up to the second super if you don't do that?
She will. So if you don't have this, she may go up to the second super. Yeah, but
Start
that's
laying
okay.
eggs there?
Huh?
Start laying eggs?
Yeah, start laying eggs. That's what she's looking for a place to lay eggs.
Yeah.
Right, so if they get if there's not enough room, too crowded down in the brood chamber in the bottom box, then she'll go up there and look for space to lay eggs. If they don't have the percentage of drone bees that they want, because if we gave them foundation, right, they only have worker-sized cells down there, she'll be wandering around the hive looking for a place to lay drones. That's why sometimes you get eggs in your honey supers, brood in your honey supers.
So how many
So-
boxes need to be in the brood chamber?
So typically I would have 2 deep boxes, 2 Langstroth's depth boxes for a brood chamber. If you got a good queen, she's going to fill up more than the middle of one box worth of brood. At least in the springtime, in the beginning of the summertime. She needs more space for it. So I'd have 2 boxes for the queen, and then if you're going to use one of these, put this above your second box. And then your third, fourth, whatever box is above that is for honey. That's surplus for the bee, right? So there's one reason, so it's a good question. It gives me an opportunity to explain why we use the same size frame. So we like to use the standard deep Langstroth size frame in all our boxes, not just the brood chamber, but also the honey supers. So if the queen does go up there in the second, third, fourth box, wherever, you can just take that frame of brood out and put it back down below. You just swap the frames, right? So if you have different size frames, you can't do that. If you have all the same size frame, then you could move it. Or you can just leave her. Let her go wherever she wants in there. Let her lay eggs wherever she wants in the hive. Why do you care? It's just not going to hurt you. Because when you go to extract honey, you're going to take them out, right? The hobbyist people, you're just going to take a frame of honey out at a time, put it in another box to take it back to the garage or the house or wherever to extract it. So if it has brood in it, well, just leave it in there. Just take the frames of honey, leave the frames of brood wherever they are. We don't care where she goes. Just let her go where she wants. It's not a big deal.
How about if we have small frames, you can put it back in the bottom one?
You could put a medium or shallow frame back in the deep box, so the bees will build comb along the bottom of that frame. That's okay. Let them do it.
And
Doesn't hurt you any. You just can't put a big frame in a small box. You can put the smaller frame in the big box, and then they'll comb. I mean, you can cut it off later if you want. Later in the spring when they're not using it, and they've taken all the honey out of it, melt it down, use the wax, or just leave it. Yeah. Right. So it's not a problem. Right. Sometimes we get a little too fussy with our beekeeping equipment. The bees just don't figure it out. They can make do with the space in there no matter what type of hive it is. Okay, so let's see. We probably got more questions on the hive equipment. I don't know. We always have lots of questions about beekeeping equipment. You know, there's different size boxes, mediums. You have some mediums, I gather. You're using both.
I have a
Yeah.
large one on the bottom and a medium on the top.
Yeah. Okay. That's not wrong to do. I'm just giving you some of the easier
like dogs,
scenarios.
cats, pigs.
So
just
if the
going
queen went up in your
box.
medium super, lay eggs, well, you can take that medium out and put it in the deep box. Who cares? You know, they might build comb along the bottom bar of that medium frame, maybe about 2 inches. All right, let them do it. Right? Okay, so if you're going to keep mediums, though, you know, a lot of people just keep all medium. That's okay too. You just have more boxes and more frames to handle. You know, like if you got in there and had to look for the queen, well, then you got mediums. Well, you got to go through a whole bunch more frames, a whole bunch more boxes to arrange. But you know, it's not a big deal. You only got 1 or 2 colonies. It's okay. Yeah.
Do you prefer the flat bar style hive tool or the J-hook style?
So I've used some of all the different hive tool styles. That J-hook's nice for pulling frames out. You'll see in a minute when they really stick them down. It's nice to just use it like a pry bar. But actually, the one I prefer, and it might be in my
It's
truck.
at
I don't know
home.
where it went today. I took just the standard hive tool, and then I cut a little angle on it, so it's got more of a point. And I just modified it for use to. You can cut. It's more like a knife. You can cut. So,
My favorite is that kind because it's good at scraping wallpaper off.
yeah,
I like the J-hook because I'm pulling hives, that's why I was wondering if you prefer.
we've got some that, there's some that have kind of both too. They've got like this, and it's got a little hook out the side, kind of looks like a thumb sticking out there. Those are handy too. I'm mostly used to this one. Because you use it to scrape with. You can scrape with this end, right? Pull that across when you're scraping out the frame rest, or you want to scrape off some extra wax. And you can also scrape with this, but you can use this kind of like a J-hook, too, if you put that under just right and pull it up. Or you can put this in between the frames and turn it this way, separate the frames that way. So, depends on the chore you got to do that day in bees, right? General standard use, whatever you're doing. So let's say you were caging a bunch of queens, right? Let's say you've had a bunch of newts and you're pulling frames out. You want to go right for the middle frame because the queen might be on that, and you want to pull it straight up carefully, right? This you're going to have to move frames back and forth before you get out. You might smash it easy. That little J-hook one, you can just pop them straight up. So if you were doing, that was the chore for the day, I might use the hook pipe tool.
I just noticed I have to be careful because I get a little aggressive once in a while. I have to
Yeah.
pull my top rails off,
Pull your top.
and screw them
Yep.
up.
So there's lots of bee gadgets out there, speaking of beekeeping equipment. Those little frame grips, you can hang on. So I was asking another beekeeper about those. I was going to buy one. He says, do you sell those, or do you use those? He says, oh yeah, they're great for pulling the top bars off the frame. So it's best, to work the frame loose before you pull it out, rather than just grab it and rip it out.
Will you talk about how you design your frame so that it doesn't pull off the top bars easily?
Yeah, let's see. I don't have.
You have some in the barn hive.
I do.
Yeah.
So
Oh.
when I got a spider. Sorry. So I'll put make sure that I put a staple on the under the ear of the frame top bar so that it stays on there. And then I also, when I manufacture my frames, I use a bottom bar to the frame that is nailed in from the side, from the side bar into the bottom bar. So when you pull it up, you've got the strength of the staple or the nail in there, so it doesn't separate. So if it were a longer bottom bar, and I was nailing from the bottom bar up into here, they'll stick it down below, and when you pull it off, it's likely to pull that way. So I've, a couple little details we put into how we assemble and how we manufacture a frame that makes it less likely for a frame to come apart when you're taking it out and it's really heavy with honey and stuck down, or when you're running through an uncapper and taking the caps off, or when you're putting it in the extractor and spinning it around, got a lot of force on it. So we put some effort into those little details and make it a little more durable frame. Okay, more on equipment?
Questions?
Talk more about that little bar frame. That's almost like all I love to
sure.
use it for.
Sure, okay. So in addition to the frame of this frame, so we have, we came up with the idea here of some middle bars for support for the comb. So quite often they'll use a foundationless frame in a shallow frame, right, or a medium depth frame. But that's a lot of comb if it's unsupported. You could put an empty frame in there, which no doubt if you've kept bees long enough that you've done that. If you put it in there unsupported, they'll build a sheet, without foundation in there. But if you were to put that into an extractor, it'd fly out of there when you put some force on it. Or if you were to hold it up like this, so gravity pulls it apart, and it isn't stuck down all the way, it could fall out. So we put these little dowels in here to support. It's a way to have a foundationless frame that you can use for a number of different things, but still have the support that you need in a deep frame. And so originally I designed this middle bar frame. I call it the middle bar frame. So we have bars on the frame. We have the top bar, the bottom bar, and the middle bar.
And sidebars.
And sidebars, or sidebars. Europe, England, they call these sidebars. Here we usually call them end bars. So we designed this so we could cut comb out of there. So the bees will build their own foundation, right? And then we can cut 8 4x4 squares of cut comb, honeycomb out of there, so you can use it without having to own an expensive piece of equipment like an extractor, right? You just cut the comb out and leave it out. So that's the original reason I designed this one. So we do use it for that. It works great for that. But there's also lots of other uses for the millbar fan too. So one way to help keep so you don't have to use a queen excluder. I mean, it'll help, right? So we don't want brood in our supers. That's why we use this lid. But one of the reasons the queen is up in your super to wander around is she's looking for space to lay drones. The bees want a certain percentage of drone bees in ratio to the worker bees. So in the springtime, they want a whole bunch of workers. Later on, she's going to go looking for a place to lay eggs in a bigger cell, in the drone cell. It's a larger size, right? So if you put a foundation that's framed in, typically the bees are going to dry off the comb and they're going to build drone-sized cells. So you'll have drone brood in your foundation that's framed. And you put that in the bottom, right? Then she won't go up in your supers, right? So you don't have to have your excluder. It's not always, doesn't always work that way, but it's helped. She's got plenty of space in her brood chamber for both workers and drones. She's got everything she needs down there. There's no reason for her to go elsewhere in the hive to lay drones, brood, put brood in the honey chamber. So it helps with that. It doesn't cure it, but it helps. Yep. Okay. Let's see. Any more equipment questions? What else can we talk about? We have some more equipment reference answers and things for you when we're in the actual beehive out there. There's a screened bottom board I was going to show you. Subject to bottom boards. There's one out there I think we'll talk about. All right, enough on equipment. Who's brave enough to go out there in the heat with their bee suit? Yeah, you are? All right.
Actually, I'm just looking at the piece.
Okay, so all right, let's get ready to go that way then. So we've got some suits we can lend to you for the class. If you need a bee suit, there's a box of them here. You can try some of those on, find the size of bee suits that fit you.
Or we have some really pretty ones for sale over there. We have some manly ones, but most of them are good.
Show us your bee suits now. Show everybody.
Oh, okay. Can I show you?
So a little history on these. So years ago I was on a trip. I was over in Russia. And I went into a bee supply store over there, and I brought back a couple of veils like they use over there. And so Alicia used that for a pattern and made up some of her own.
So this is the one that he brought back from Russia, and it's the one I always wear. It's really pretty. And then these are the ones that I copied. So the difference is they used to have an elastic there, so you could pull that down. But I don't want that. I don't want bees to be able to get in there. So I've just stitched it straight to the top there. But we're offering these, they're $5 off today if you want to purchase one, and you can use it for our little class, and then you can have it as a mosquito net and throw it in your car for your camping trip, protect your face, for all kinds of things. So $5 off, and take a picture of yourself wearing your new bee veil and post it on Instagram and tag us. So we have lip balm today, and it's my favorite lip balm recipe. I've tried dozens of lip balm recipes, and this is my favorite because it's like super luxurious on your lips, but it's also doesn't melt in the car. You know, like, do you remember, I don't know, lip smackers in high school? I'd open it and it would spill everywhere in your purse or whatever. Anyway, this doesn't do that. It's really nice. It keeps its shape, but it's still soft, and it's made with really wholesome organic ingredients like our beeswax and then like jojoba oil and coconut oil and vitamin E and all the things that you'd want to put on your skin anyway. Like, you could probably eat it and still be safe, you know, because it's all wholesome organic ingredients. So check that out too. And then we have some beeswax wraps that we have sets of 3 you can get, and you use those to cover food, like in place of saran wrap. And then you can wash them in like medium water and like soap if you want to.
They're great.
Yeah, they're really great, and they kind of lose their sticky over time, and you can re-sticky them. But if you want to clean them between uses, just wash them by hand in the water. So that's what we brought today to sell to you if you want. Maybe I think we have some greeting cards or something like that over there too. But anyway, look at our stuff because it's really cool, and yeah.
Okay.